Introduction. The charm of romance and adventure surrounding the discovery of hitherto unknown lands has from the earliest ages been the lure that has tempted men to prosecute voyages and travels of exploration. Whether under the pretext of science, religion, or conquest, hardship and danger have alike been undergone with fortitude and cheerfulness, in the hope of being the first to find things strange and new, and return to civilized communities with the tidings. In the days of Spain's supremacy, after the eyes of Europe had been dazzled with the sights of riches brought from the New World, and men's ears filled with fairy-like tales of the wondrous races discovered, it was but natural that the adventurous gallants of that age should roam in search of seas yet to be won. Some such hope of finding a land wherein the glorious conquests of Cortes and Pizarro could be repeated, brought de Quiros on a quest that led him almost within hail of our shores. What little realization of his dreams of cities rich with temples, blazing with barbaric gold, inhabited by semi-civilized people skilled in strange arts, he would have found in the naked nomads of Terra Australis, and their rude shelters of bough and bark we now know. And perhaps it was as well for the skilful pilot that he died with his mission unfulfilled, save in fancy. His lieutenant, Torres, came nearer solving the secret of the southern seas, and, in fact, reports citing hills to the southward which, on slight foundation, are supposed to have been the present Cape York, but more probably were the higher lands of Prince of Wales Island. In all likelihood, he saw enough of the natives of the Straits to convince him that no such rich pickings were to be had, as had fallen to the lot of the lucky conquerors of Mexico and Peru. He came across none of the legendary canoes from the land of gold, deep laden with the precious metal, nor sandy beaches strewn with jewels to be had for the gathering. He puts on record what he thought of the islanders in the few terse words that they were, quote, black, naked and corpulent, end quote. Beyond that, they do not seem to have impressed him. Apparently they, on their part, were not impressed at being informed that they were thenceforth subjects of the King of Spain, for their dislike to Europeans appears to have increased as the unfortunate Dutch captains, Carstens and Poole, afterwards found to their cost. Even the gracious acts of His Holiness the Pope, in partitioning these unknown lands between Spain and Portugal, did not meet with the favourable consideration at their hands that it deserved. The jealousy with which the maritime nations of Europe guarded their discoveries from each other has been the means of putting great difficulties in the way of tracing out the early traditions of the great South Land. The domineering Spaniard looked upon the Portuguese navigator as a formidable rival in the race for trade, and the sturdy Hollander they regarded as a natural enemy and a rebel. The generous emulation of fellow workers in the cause of scientific discovery was unknown, and the secrets of the sea were scrupulously kept. On behalf of Dutch reticence, it may be said that the cause of the merited hatred they bore to Spain was still too fresh in their memory to allow them to divulge anything that might possibly benefit a Spaniard. Sir William Temple, ambassador at The Hague in the time of Charles II, gives it as his opinion that a, quote, southern continent has long since been found out, end quote. He avers that, according to descriptions he has gathered, quote, it is as long as Java, and is marked on the maps by the name of New Holland, but to what extent the lands extend either to the south, the east, or the west, none know, end quote. He states that he has heard it said among the Dutch that their East India Company, quote, have long since forbidden, and under the greatest penalties, any further attempts at discovering that continent, having already more trade than they can turn to account, and fearing some more populous nation of Europe might make great establishments of trade in some of these unknown regions, which might ruin or impair what they already have in their Indies." End quote. But although no documentary evidence has been brought to light proving beyond all doubt the certain discovery of the South Land in the 16th century, we find on the old charts of the world various tracings indicating a knowledge of the existence of this continent, which would appear to have been derived from other than fabulous sources. A shadowy claim to the honour of being the first discoverer of Terra Australis has been advanced on behalf of the Frenchman Gonville, who sailed from Honfleur in 1503 on a voyage to the East Indies. He is said to have doubled the Cape of Good Hope, and being driven by stress of weather into the unknown sea, found a land inhabited by friendly people with whom he stayed some time, being accompanied back to France by one of the king's sons, who was desirous of studying the precepts of Christianity. The general belief, however, is that it was probably Madagascar, whereon de Gonville landed. Another claim, based upon the authority of an ancient map, is put forward for the noted Portuguese navigator Magellan's, when in the service of the Emperor Charles V of Spain. But there is little appertaining to the arguments advanced on behalf of this belief to render it credible. In some of the old charts dating back to the middle of the 16th century, a large country south of Java is portrayed, which from its position appears to be intended for the conjectural South Land. In all these maps, the outlines of this terra incognita are so nearly identical that it is evident various hydrographers drew their inspirations from the same sources. The annex tracing is a copy of a portion of one of the most ancient of these maps. The original was presented to the British Museum by Sir Joseph Banks in 1790. It is most carefully drawn, the coastline being elaborately filled in with names in French, and it is embellished with drawings of animals and men, being also ornamented with two shields bearing the arms of France. The map is undated, but was probably designed in the latter part of the reign of Francis L. for his son the Dauphin, afterwards Henry II. It has been alleged that Captain Cook was guided by these charts to the eastern shore of New Holland, and the similarity of some of the names thereon, such as Costa de Herbages and Costa Dangerous, to names given by him, has been pointed out. This allegation, however, will not stand criticism. Botany Bay, for instance, is about the last place that anyone would select to bestow such a name as Costa de Herbages, which name would signify a rich and fertile spot, certainly not such a desolate place as Botany Bay was in Captain Cook's time. Captain Tench, one of the survey party sent there in 1789, writes in his journal, quote, "We were unanimously of the opinion that had not the nautical part of Mr. Cook's description been so accurately laid down, there would exist the utmost reason to believe that those who have described the contiguous country had never seen it. On the side of the harbour, a line of sea coast more than 30 miles long, we did not find 200 acres which could be cultivated." End quote. Any approximation, then, in position between Botany Bay and the fabulous Costa de Herbages must be considered as accidental. The generally received opinion of this and the other charts is that Java is fairly well laid down, and that Great Java stands for the supposed South Land. Plausible as this theory reads, it is, however, open to objection. If it be accepted, and the narrow strait, the River Grand, be looked upon as that portion of the Indian Ocean dividing Java from the northwest coast of Australia, any resemblance to the present known shape of our continent is very hard to trace, unless after a most distorted fashion. If, however, we make the necessary allowances for the many errors that would creep in from one transcription to another, and look upon Java and Java le Grand as one continent intersected by a Mediterranean Sea, we have a fair, if rude, conception of the north coast of Australia. Moreover, let the reader imagine a south coast line drawn from Bay Perdue on the east to Havre de Silla on the west, doing away with the conjectural east and west continuations south of those points, the deep inlet between Java and Java Le Grand standing for the Gulf of Carpentaria, a very passable outline of the whole continent is obtained. And it is more than probable that this view was originally suggested by this map, and from it sprang the belief current, even to the beginning of this century, that an open passage existed from the west coast either into the Gulf of Carpentaria or to the head of Spencer's Gulf. The other maps give no more information than this one, and the identity of their origin is obvious. One, however, has been found in the British Museum, the features of which are different. It is a rough copy of an old map showing the northwest portion of a continent to the south of Java Major. It bears a legend in Portuguese of which the following is a translation. Quote, Nuca Antara was discovered in the year 1601 by Manuel Godinho Heredia, by command of the Viceroy Ares de Saldanha. End quote. This would point to a Portuguese discovery of Australia immediately preceding the Dutch one. In Cornelius Whitfleet's Descriptions Ptolemaicae Augmentum, Louvain, 1598, the following passage is to be found. Quote, The Australis Terra is the most southern of all lands. It is separated by New Guinea by a narrow strait. Its shores are hitherto but little known, since after one voyage and another that route has been deserted, and seldom is the country visited unless when sailors are driven there by storms. The Australis Terra begins at 2 or 3 degrees from the equator, and is maintained by some to be of so great an extent that if it were thoroughly explored it would be regarded as a 5th part of the world. End quote. The above is so vague and suppositious that it would scarcely be worth quoting, were it not for the singular mention of the narrow strait separating Australis Terra from New Guinea. For at this time Torres had not sailed through the straits, nor was the fact of his having done so known to the world until the end of the 18th century, when Dalrymple discovered his report amongst the archives of Manila and did justice to his memory. In 1605, Pedro Fernandez de Quiros, having for his second-in-command Luis Vaz de Torres, sailed from Callao with 2 well-armed vessels and a corvette. After the discovery of several islands, they came to a land which Quiros supposed to be the continent he was in search of, and therefore named it Australia de Espiritu Santo. Quote, At 1 hour past midnight, the Capitana, Quiros's vessel, departed without any notice given to us and without making any signal. End quote. This extraordinary conduct was supposed to be the result of discontent and mutiny amongst the sailors, an outbreak having already taken place, which was not quelled quite so firmly as Torres advocated. After vainly waiting for many days, Torres set sail, and first ascertaining that it was only an island where they had been anchored, he made his way by the dangerous south coast of New Guinea to Manila, where he arrived in 1607.